Welcome to everyone. I'm Roy Scarborough, president of the Friends of the Hannon Library, and welcome to our final installment of this academic year's speaker series. And we're looking forward to many more years of that. We have a good show for you tonight.
Can you speak up?
Okay, yes. I'll have some closing remarks at the end of our speaker's presentation, so please don't jump up right away. Be just brief. And one thing we always do at events at Southern Oregon State College is that we have a tradition of reading the land acknowledgement, recognizing the people who lived here long before we built the college. And we read it verbatim, and I'm going to read it to you now. The Friends of the Hannon Library take this moment to acknowledge that Southern Oregon University is located within the ancestral homelands of the Shasta, Tacoma, Lagawa peoples who lived here since time immemorial. These tribes were displaced during the rapid Euro-American colonization, the gold rush, and armed conflict in 1851 and 1856. In the 1850s, discovery of gold and settlement brought thousands of Euro-Americans to their lands, leading to warfare, epidemics, starvation, villages being burned. In 1853, the first of several treaties were signed, confederating these tribes and others together, who would then be referred to as the Rogue River Tribe. These treaties ceded most of their homelands to the United States, and in return, they were guaranteed a permanent homeland reserved for them. At the end of the Rogue River Wars in 1856, these tribes and many others were removed to the Siletz Reservation and the Grand Ronde Reservation in Oregon. Today, the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde Community of Oregon and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians are living descendants of the Tacoma, Shasta, and Lagawa peoples of this area. The Friends of the Hannon Library encourage you to learn about the land you reside on and to join us in advocating for the inherent sovereignty of the indigenous people. And I always like to mention that the Cow Creek Band in Roseburg were also descendants of the Tacoma people. All right. What I would like to do is read a few lines, very few lines, of a couple of poems that grabbed me this week and going over Susanne's translation of the Rilke poems. And one of them is All It Takes. And all it takes is a woman pausing slightly on the balcony or a window frame to be one we've lost the moment she appears. And if she lifts her arms to tie up her hair, tender vase, how suddenly our grief sharpens and now our sorrow flares. And I'm imagining him in Paris looking up at those windows as I sometimes do when I'm in a town.
Speak up a little, please.
Okay, we don't have a microphone this time, do we?
Well, because she's wearing it currently.
Okay. A few more lines from another poem. It is, what longing, what regret? To what longing and to what regret have we fallen victim, we who mine poetry for the unique universal? That grabbed me because all great poets go for something universal, something unique. And I think we're fortunate to be presented with a translation that takes us there. Susanne Petermann is a Southern Oregon poet who has published her poems and translations in many respected journals, including Agni and the Carl Jung Journal of Culture and Psyche. Suzanne's book of translations, Selected Poems of Rainer Maria Rilke, was published by Cascade Books in 2017. I have the Kindle edition, and there are hard copies over there available for those who would like to purchase them, and I highly recommend it. Susanne spent a decade traveling and studying in Europe and taught English in Casablanca, Morocco. So like the windows that Rilke is referring to, that he's addressing in some of these poems, the translator gives us a window. It's an art form that gives us a window into the poet that we might not otherwise have access to. So we should be grateful for those translators, and we should be grateful for Susanne Petermann for bringing Rilke's world to us to enjoy. So without further ado, I am inviting you to welcome Susanne Petermann to be our featured speaker tonight of Friends of the Hannon Library.
Thank you, Friends of Hannon Library, for welcoming me tonight. Thank you especially to Sophia, who had the idea that I should do this. It was about a year ago, I think. And I said yes immediately because I always have something to say about translation, and I love having an audience to listen. So thanks for coming. Welcome, everybody. I'm Susanne Petermann. I'm going to be talking about translating, as Roy said, Rainer Maria Rilke's French poetry. So you all know Rilke, if you know poetry. He's quoted an awful lot everywhere I see him. But all of the quotes that you will see are translated from the German. Okay, he wrote so much that the French work is just like this peripheral thing over here that people really ignore. So I took it upon myself to focus on that. They've only been translated once, the French poems, and here I am trying to do it better. So tonight, I'm going to share with you a few things that I've learned by undertaking this project of translating Rilke's French poetry. Second, I'm going to take you through a process, a detailed process of my translation process. I said that wrong. An example of my translation process using the poem that you see here, and I'm going to have a handout for you that you can look at and follow. And third, I will invite you to ask questions and make your comments, and then Roy will give his closing remarks. So 5 things to think about as we begin tonight. Things about translation. All communication is translation, right? When you hear me talk, you interpret it into your own language and you connect it to what you know. When you read, you do the same thing. You're interpreting what you're reading. So all communication is translation. All of us are translators all the time, every day. Second, if you want to translate poetry from another language, fluency in that language is less important than being a poet. I'll say that again. Fluency in the source language is less important than being a poet. Third, every poem has a historical context. Every poet has a lifeline and history that happens around them. And it's worth spending a little time studying the poet's life and work, what they went through. And I will go into more about Rilke's life in a nutshell later in my talk, and why he wrote in French, right? So the fourth point I want to make, and this is really important to me, I bring my particular self, my outlook on life, and the lenses through which I live my life and see the world. I bring all of that to my translation process. I can't not do that. There's no such thing as an objective translation. That's my fifth point. There's no authoritative, right, or objective translation. It has everything to do, has everything to do with the translator, okay? So, as I told you, I was invited to be here tonight, and I said yes right away. I'm very passionate about this subject. And I want to share the great pleasure and fulfillment I've received in working with these poems. My mission is to make Rilke's French work accessible. I'm glad you used that word, Roy, because access is everything. If you don't know French, how can you enjoy these poems? If you know French a little bit, you can enjoy the translation and the French side by side. So anyway, I want people to have access to this wonderful work, this body of work. I mean, he wrote 400 poems in French. Why don't we see them? You know, because they haven't been translated. So Rilke may be a popular poet, but if you dig a little bit into his poetry, you will find a really deep thinker who is difficult to understand. I'm not saying I understand him, but I trust my decades of direct personal experience and study, and I want to share this with my readers. So my intention in coming here is to represent Rilke's voice as best I can, to honor him who has become a wise teacher and counselor to me. So about 30 years ago, when I started doing this, I was doing for myself a personal, what I called a poetry therapy practice. Okay, I'm not a counselor. I wasn't then, I'm not now, but for myself, I was taking one poem per month and memorizing it and saying it as often as I could every day for 1 month. I would recommend it. There's a reason why we say memorizing is learning by heart. It gets into your body. It starts telling your story. You see yourself in the mirror of that poem. It's quite magical. So I had just returned from several years of living in the French language, both in France and in Morocco. And I was majorly culture shocked. I was living in Los Angeles. And things were strange for me, you can imagine. I was in a bookstore and I looked at the poetry section and I found a book called The Collected French Poems of Rainer Maria Rilke. I remembered Rilke from German literature class in college. And I thought, did he write in French? Well, sure enough, here was a whole book full of it. And it was a bilingual edition, which is great. I saw the French on one side, the English on the other side. So I took it home and I looked for something to use in my poetry practice. And I did not find one. In 400 poems, there was not one that felt good in my mouth, in my body, that I could memorize and enjoy. The translations weren't any good. So I started to change them. I took a pencil, very lightly changed one word or the other word. And pretty soon I was doing the whole book. So, but at first I didn't know if I really had the right to do that. Okay. You know, I still was of the impression that if it said that in the book, then that was the translation. Well, so I wrote to a couple of translators that I like. One of them was Robert Bly, who, bless his soul, passed away a couple of years ago. Very good translator. And Coleman Barks, who you probably know from all the Rumi poems that we all love. I wrote to them because I liked their translations and I was using them. And they wrote back, these famous people writing me back, little typewritten pages. Dear Susanne. And basically they just said, just do it. You're going to learn to do it by doing it, you know, and so that encouraged me. So I really dug into it at that point. So I was motivated by really wanting these Rilke poems, and also by, of course, the fact that I didn't like the translations. But I soon fell in love with Rilke's French work, and here I am, having published 2 books, working on my 3rd one. I just want to say parenthetically here, I am not on social media. You will not find me there. If you want to know about my 3rd book, sign a piece of paper over there on Holly's table, and I will contact you when it comes out. Okay. So, what is it to translate a poem? How does the process work? What gives me liberty as a translator to make the choices that I made? In a moment, I'm going to give you a handout. And that will illustrate an example of my process. So there are 4 basic steps in translating a poem. This might be obvious to you. First, you look at the poem. How does it look physically? Does it have a long, skinny shape? Is it divided into stanzas? Are the lines all the same length? What does it look like? Then read the poem, get a general sense of the story of what's written, what's on the page. And as you do that, start putting down a literal version, okay? So, and pretty soon there's the original and there's the literal, and you will find that the language, well, first of all, it sounds awkward. Second, what is the language of the original compared to how we speak? So in French, there are different levels of language, more than we have. We have formal and casual, but their range is way wider. So in poetry, especially, it might be very formal. So that's one thing to notice in the original. Or it might be antiquated, or it might be, you know, casual. It might have incomplete sentences or run-on sentences or other things. In this one, for example, you'll see that some of the first lines are capitalized and some are not. That's another thing to notice. Is there a rhyme scheme? What's the rhythm of the poem? And then lastly, what does it mean? That's the hardest question, because the poet is no longer alive. I can't ask him. So what did he mean when he said this or that? Okay, so you've got the original, you've got your literal so far. Okay, it's going to evolve. You could stop there. Okay, it's an accurate depiction of what the poem is, but what I want is some pleasure in the words. I want to memorize this poem. I want it to feel good. And I want to be inspired by it. So I take it further than the literal, and I take some liberties to try to make it beautiful and inspiring, which I know Rilke always is. So the 4th step is to write a draft that restores the poetry that was lost between the original and the literal. Okay, ready for the handout. I do have translation priorities when I do this. My first priority is musical language. I try to keep the line lengths just about the same as the original. I try to keep the poem just as long as the original or short. And I try to stick with the ideas that I'm given. Okay, so you've got the handout. I guess I need one too. Thanks. Okay, so on the top left, you see the original. Top right, you see the literal. Bottom left, my current working draft, and then a commentary. I'll share all this with you so you don't have to read it yourself. Okay, I'm going to read the original in the French. Well, wait, first, before I read it, look at the physical aspect of it, the way I said that I do. So the shape is like this, and then the lines are irregular. Some are longer and some are shorter. And then there's one line at the bottom. That's the shape of it, right? Okay, I'll read the French now. So just listen for the sounds. If you don't know French, just close your eyes and listen to what you hear, or you follow along if you like. Hiver. J'aime les hivers d'autrefois qui n'étaient point encore sportifs. On les craignait un peu, tant ils étaient durs et vifs. On les affrontait avec un brin de courage pour rentrer chez soi blanc, étincelant, roi mage. Et le feu, ce grand feu qui nous consolait d'eux, était un feu fort et vivant, un vrai feu. On écrivait mal, on avait les doigts tout raides, mais quelle joie de rêver et d'entretenir ce qui est, aux souvenirs qui s'en vont, de tarder un peu. Ils venaient si près, on les voyait mieux qu'en été. On leur proposait les couleurs. Tout était peinture à l'intérieur, tandis que dehors, tout se faisait estampe. Et les arbres qui travaillaient chez eux à la lampe. Okay. Who does not know French here? Okay. Tell me what you heard, if anything. Any patterns, sounds? What did you hear?
I'd say melody.
Melody.
Yeah.
Great.
Nice, wistful.
Wistful?
Wistful.
Uh-huh. Wistful, melody. That's great.
Beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Okay.
It seems to be a cadence.
Okay, a rhythm to it. Yes, yes. Good. Okay, so and those of you who do know French, did you notice anything else besides those things?
Rhyme scheme.
Rhyme scheme.
Rhyme couplet.
Exactly. Every two lines rhyme at the end. Sportif, vif, courage, bromage. Every two lines. Right. Okay. So I'll read my literal version, top of the page on the right. So this, you'll hear some awkwardness, but that's what happens. You would think that going from, original to literal is a matter of, a few hours. No, I changed something on this the other day. And I've been working on this for, I don't know, months now. So it keeps evolving, but here's what I've got so far. Winter. I love the winters of long ago that hadn't yet become so sporty. We feared them a bit. They were that hard and lively. We confronted them with a small bit of courage, only to return home white, sparkling, a wise king. And the fire, that grand fire that consoled us from them, was a strong and living fire, a real fire. Our writing was bad. Our fingers were so stiff, all stiff. But what joy to dream and cultivate what helps our fleeting memories stay a little while. They came so close, we could see them better than in summer. One proposed colors for them. Everything was like a painting inside, while outdoors, everything looked like a print. And the trees that worked at home in the lamplight. Okay, so you'll see it corresponds exactly to the line length and the shape of the poem. And the punctuation, everything's the same. I don't do rhyme, in case you're wondering. I think it takes too much away from the artistry and the poetic language, so I don't follow the rhyme scheme. It's good to notice it though. Okay, so the general story of the poem is that this poet likes winter, but he's got a beef here. He says, you know, winters are too sporty now, and I want them to be the way they used to be. Haven't we all thought that in some subject? I want the world to be the way it was, the way I remember it from long ago, right? And he wants winter to be, you know, he wants us to be a little bit afraid of it. Because then we have reverence for it and we have respect for it. But these sports, he doesn't know about that. So he comes back home, he sits in front of the fire, he's in a contemplative mood, and he starts writing poetry maybe, and he starts remembering things in this contemplative mood, sitting by the fire. He compares that feeling to the feeling we have in summer. And he says summers are colorful, winters are black and white. And the trees that worked at home in the lamplight. That's a bit mystical. He zooms out. He sees the world from maybe the sky. This is how I imagine it. The trees are snow-covered. They look like they're dormant, but actually underground. They're working. They're bringing the new season into existence. So that's the general meaning of the poem. Of course, you know, I didn't come to it quickly. Again, I'm telling you, this page is the product of many months of work. So just so you know. All right, so let's dig into this a little bit. I'm not going to go through the whole poem with you because we'd be here all night. But let's just look at the first line of this. J'aime les hivers d'autrefois qui n'étaient point encore sportifs. I love the winters of long ago. That sounds pretty good. That hadn't yet become so sporty. What does he mean by that? You know, well, we have a clue in the next line. We feared them a bit. They were that hard and lively. He wants the winter just to be what it is without interference by sports. So this thing about sporty, you know, I thought, I wonder when the Winter Olympics began. Just on a lark, I Googled it, which I don't usually do a lot. I Googled, when did the Winter Olympics start? I found the answer, 1924. This is exactly the year this was written. So was that a coincidence? I don't know, maybe so, but they took place in France. He was living in French-speaking Switzerland. Maybe he knew about it. I don't think he did, but you never know. But for a while, I thought, well, why not? And I loved the winters of long ago before there were the Winter Olympics. why not? You know, so I tried that out for a while and for, a couple weeks I was saying it that way. And then I thought, yeah, it's kind of a stretch. I thought, and it's too specific. He's talking about something more general than the Winter Olympics. So then I thought, well, what's his objection? What is he really complaining about here? And I thought, since he refers to winter being a little scary and that we have lost our reverence for them, maybe he's talking about commercialization or exploitation or something like that. So then I thought, I love the winters of long ago, before the winter industrial complex. Ooh, that really punched it, right? And for a while I stayed with that because it gave me that feeling of, okay, I have a complaint. I don't want winter to be so commercialized anymore. I liked winter the way they were before. Okay, so I had that for a while, and then not very long after I printed this out for you, I changed it to what I have, what you see below on the lower left. I love the winters of long ago, before there was so much focus on sports. So you can see that I've gone from, literal over here, very interpretive, and out here. I moved a little bit back more toward the middle. There's a spectrum of translation, and it's pretty wide. So I tend to be more on this side than on the literal side, but winter industrial complex, really? Not really. Before there was so much focus on sports, that felt okay to me. So that's what I've got now. And again, I'm calling this a working draft, okay? I changed something on it just this morning. Okay. The second line I would like to treat is the second issue I'd like to look at is this. Dur et vif. Okay, literally hard and lively. He's describing winter. Okay, so I had many different choices. Hard is not hard, difficult to get to. And it's got one syllable, just like the French. One thing I like about the French here is dur et vif, one syllable each, like they're really hard and really intense, thrilling. What, another adjective with one syllable, I couldn't find it. So, but what it made me think of, and this is a little sidebar, this made me think of Mary Oliver's poem, Wild Geese. You all know it. You don't have to be good. You don't have to walk 100 miles through the desert on your knees repenting, right? At the end of that, she says, or in the middle somewhere, she says that the call of the geese sounds to her harsh and exciting. Right? I love that. It's the most brilliant pairing of adjectives that I've ever seen in poetry. Harsh and exciting. I thought, that's what I'm going to do here. We feared them a bit. They were that harsh and exciting. Doesn't that describe what we're getting to? But then I was talking to some friends and I read them that version that I had that day. And they said, you can't copy Mary Oliver. If she doesn't have a patent on that pairing of adjectives, she should. So anyway, I had a hard time with that because I love the two words with one syllable. And so the feeling is the thrill that we're approaching something that's a little bit dangerous. So I had to rearrange these lines in a major way. I turned the one line into two lines. You can see what I came up with down below. We were a little afraid of them, thrilled by how their harshness made us shudder. So that began my journey to break my own rule of sticking with the same amount of lines, the same line lengths, and to change the shape of the poem altogether. You can see that my current working draft has 8 lines plus 8 lines plus 2 lines, where his is 13 altogether plus 1 at the bottom. So, but it was that line that did it, that precipitated that whole change. Okay, one more example. The 4th line here, the Wamaj, the wise king. What is that about? So in French, this refers to the 3 wise men of the Bible, or sometimes we say the 3 kings. Well, I thought that the white snow, the sparkling snow, had nothing to do with the wise man. I couldn't put it together. These Middle Eastern or African kings, sparkling and white. It didn't go for me. So I thought, okay, what am I going to do with this? Yeah, so this has a lot to do with Rilke's relationship to Catholicism and stuff I don't need to go into here. So what I came up with, what you have on your handout is, we'd gather a bit of courage and go outside, only to return all white, sparkling like Christmas. Okay, I printed these out yesterday. This morning, I'm lying in bed thinking about this. White, sparkling, wise man. And I thought, well, what's the feeling? He's been out in the harsh winter. He's been trudging around in the snow. He comes home to the fire. He looks white, sparkling. And then I get lost with the wise man part. But the feeling is, I think, as I thought about it this morning, I thought, he's feeling kind of royal. You know, he's feeling powerful, empowered, maybe tall in some way, okay? And so it points to the magic of Christmas, really, which is why I used sparkling like Christmas. But, so I don't know, I'm still working on it. I haven't come up with an alternate to what you see there. To be continued. Okay, so as I said, we could go on, and between the literal and the current working draft, you can see how many versions there were, how many times I read it to my friends. Do you like this? What do you think of that? Anyway, I will read you my current working draft, but before, yeah, so look at the shape. 2 stanzas of 8 lines and 2 more at the bottom. Winter. I love the winters of long ago, before there was so much focus on sports. We were a little afraid of them, thrilled by how their harshness made us shudder. We'd gather a bit of courage and go outside, only to return all white, sparkling like Christmas. And that grand fire that comforted us was strong and real, a living presence. Our frozen fingers could hardly write, but what joy to sit and contemplate how to persuade the memories to linger. They'd approach us, come so close to us we could see them more vividly than summer. We'd ask them what colors they wanted to be. Everything inside was a painting, all else merely a print. The trees, meanwhile, working at home by lamplight. So I want to return to some of the points that I began this talk with. Fluency in French is less important than being a poet, as I do this work. The point of poetry is to evoke imagination and emotion. You saw me looking for the feelings in this poem, and that's what guided me to the translation that I've come up with. The feeling of resentment around how sports takes the simplicity out of winter. The feeling of thrill going out into the winter weather, because it used to be a little bit dangerous. And the wonder and the joy and the magic of that season. I also told you about the historical, political, and cultural context of any poetry. So I studied a lot about Rilke's life and work. A lot is known about him. There are several very fat biographies of him if you're interested. So why did he write in French? Okay, he lived from 1875 to 1926. The centenary of his death is coming up. He was born to German-speaking parents in Prague, then called Prussia. He lived there until he was 18 or something, old enough to leave. Then he lived in various European countries, including Germany, France, Spain, Italy, Switzerland, Czechoslovakia used to be. And he also visited Russia a few different times. World War I, so he was born in 1875. 1914, World War I broke out in Europe. And that had a lot to do with him writing in French. After the war, he was pretty traumatized, even though he didn't fight. He had some kind of clerical job. He was very disillusioned with the German people. And he decided, this is near the end of his life, he decided to disown, basically, the German language and the German culture. So he moved to Switzerland, French-speaking part of Switzerland, and he set up housekeeping in an old stone castle where he wrote those 400 French poems I mentioned earlier during the last 4 years of his life. He still wrote in German too, but he wrote in French. It was his second language. He knew German pretty well, but the series of poems that this belongs to is called Exercises and Realities. That's going to be my next book. I'm not sure if I'll keep that title, but that's so he was considering French partly an exercise in language, but he sure wrote a lot if that was just an exercise, right? Okay, so yeah, moved to Switzerland. He wrote starting in 1922 till 1926 when he died. He wrote a lot of stuff in French. I also mentioned earlier that I bring myself to the translation process. You saw me do that. You saw me try things out, be crazy with it, but then also feel into the choices I had made and figure out if that was really what I wanted. I experiment with that spectrum of translation quite a bit. And some people don't call their translations translations. When I showed this to a colleague recently, she said, "Your version is not a translation. It's something else." I said, "What would you call it?" She said, well, I would have stopped with the literal. She said, I think your literal is really good. Okay, so if you want to stop there, great. But it doesn't serve me and my love of poetry. So I take it further. If you look at books that Coleman Barks has translated of Rumi, you'll see that he doesn't call them translations. He calls them versions. So he's taking a lot of liberties. He doesn't know ancient Persian language. He works with other translations. He works with people who know the language and historians. So, like I said, you don't need to know the source language to do a translation. So my new book, I don't know when it's coming out, but the next book I do is going to have all 4 of these pieces. It's going to have the original and a literal so that people who don't know French can see what I'm talking about. It's going to have my version, because if you don't like my version, you have the literal to base your version on. So go for it. Okay, and I'm also going to do a commentary. All right, so this is a short piece of the commentary here. And I may expand it to say some of the things that I've talked to you about tonight, but I'll read it, what I have so far. Rilke puts aside his formal poetic voice, setting instead a nostalgic conversational tone. The poet moves us through the sensations of being afraid of winter, afraid of the winter weather, yet a little thrilled by it. After daring to go outdoors, we're confronted by a big, warm fire. The first 2 lines describe a feeling we older people often express. I want to return to simpler times. I want the world to be as it used to be. Things are now so fast and competitive. The focus has changed from healthy respect, even reverence, to exploitation. This poem was written in the year of the first Winter Olympics in Chamonix, France. It is unknown, I should write 1924. It is unknown whether Rilke knew about this. In any case, he considered winter a contemplative time when the inner life was more alive and colorful than the outer one. Like the fire that welcomes us home, the poet comforts and warms us with the closing imagery of visual art and the personified trees who do their work underground without ceasing. They are the seminal force of nature who turn the wheel of the seasons. So that's it for me.
Incidentally, if you're interested in the issue of whether a translator rhymes or doesn't rhyme in historical work, there's dozens of translations online of Dante's Divine Comedy. There's translators who try to replicate Dante's rhyme scheme. There's translators that use some of the rhyme scheme. There's translators that don't rhyme at all. Those are usually the good ones. With one exception, John Ciardi, a great American poet, he did a translation of Dante's Inferno, which is in Italian. He rhymed every other line. Now, the other thing that John Ciardi is famous for is saying translation is the art of failure. So he went there, he did that, and he came back and said, translation is an art. It doesn't mean that he failed, but there's always something of a gap right there. And what I'm really impressed with Suzanne's book is that she has the literal translation, or she will, and she has her translation. Now, I was this past week going through her last book, and it has both the original and her translation. Well, I had my computer there, so I found myself, looking up the French words, let's see what it was, how literal it was and going back and forth. And I kind of enjoyed that, but I didn't finish reading your book because of that, because I spent so much time going back and forth. Anyway, that's I'm winging that part here. There's a couple of things I want to go over. I have two final pitches to make. One of which is that Suzanne's books are on sale over there. I would encourage you to pick one up. And secondly, I want to share with you a little bit about the Friends of the Library and our mission. I want to invite all of you who are not already members to become members and let you know that we do really important work. We help maintain the Bailey Shakespeare Collection, which is a scholarly collection of books. It's like, I don't know if there's anything like it anywhere, but it goes back decades of scholarly books and papers related to Shakespeare's, and scholars go through. We maintain that for the legacy of our Shakespeare studies in our region. Secondly, we enhance the services of the library for the benefit of the students at SOU. We sometimes purchase equipment, we purchase books that the library can't ordinarily afford. We try and raise money for that. And it's one of those feel-good kind of things that we can do. Plus, there are perks to being members of the Friends of the Library. You can check out scholarly books and go to the computer and look up scholarly articles that you don't have access to on the internet. In fact, I'm going to go downstairs and I'm going to look up Suzanne's article in the Carl Jung Journal of Culture and Psyche. I saw the abstract, and I'm going to trade it. But the only way I can see the whole article is if I go downstairs and look at it on one of the computers in this library. We're very fortunate to have this library here, and I'm proud to be a member of the Friends of the Hannon Library, and I invite everyone to become one and join us in this mission to serve the library. So I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you all for being here. We'll have another year of presentations for you to come and enjoy. Thank you. It's great to be here. Good night.